Hello. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity, and this has been so much fun for us to put together. Welcome to everybody who is on the webinar tonight. We're really happy to have you. And basically, thank you for the introduction. I hope we live up to all of the accolades you mentioned, but just briefly in terms of introduction, Fifth House is a 10-person chamber ensemble, so we're a little large in terms of size, but we also take a little bit of a different look at chamber music in terms of narrative. So we're using chamber music to tell stories in our live performances, and we also do a lot of work in the Chicago Public Schools with curriculum integration, as in teaching core curricular subjects alongside chamber music. So we do a lot of different things, and everything that we do is centered around the particular audience that we're serving. So we're constantly thinking about who our primary audience is for our series, but then even drilling down further than that, what the audiences are for each of the different venues that we perform in, because in addition to our series, we perform on other series and venues throughout the Chicago area, the Midwest, and throughout the country. So everywhere that we are is a completely different picture in terms of what we present, and a lot of the venues that we choose are non-traditional and unconventional and may not even have had chamber music any time in recent history. So it really takes a lot of work in getting to who it is that you're presenting for. But that's one of the reasons why we chose this topic today, because it's been something that has been so central to our mission, to our work in recent years. So there you see our lovely names here in case you forget who it is that we're talking to. And Eric and Adam, just go ahead and say hi so that we know that you're here.
Hello, this is Eric Snoza.
Hi, this is Adam.
So you'll be hearing a bit from Eric and Adam later on in the webinar today. We want to sort of start out by saying, what's the point of doing all of this? Why is it really important to be thinking about your audience in terms of programming? And if you read the description of today's webinar, you'll see clips about mostly Mozart, basically Beethoven. And the point of that was to think about the fact that a lot of times when new music groups or soloists or orchestras are putting together programs, they're thinking a lot about which pieces they would like to program, whether these pieces go together either stylistically or whether they provide a nice menu of different textures for a performance, but that is centered around pieces people want to perform for one reason or another. But what I'd like you to do is just take yourself out of the programming thought for a moment and put yourself in a completely different context. So let's imagine just for a minute that you're on a date with somebody. And this is somewhere we've all been, I'm sure. So imagine you're on a date with someone, and that person has planned for you what they believe to be the most perfect evening that you can possibly imagine. So what they've done is they have invited you to their favorite restaurant, which is a vegan restaurant, because that's what they are. And their thought on taking you to this restaurant is, you know what, I love vegan food, so it's very clear that you're going to love vegan food. And honestly, if you don't already love vegan food, you're going to know more about it by reading the menu, by getting to know it through conversation with me. And this person is really thinking that there is total confidence in, if you know more about it, if you're educated in it, you're going to win. That's premise number one. So imagine you're sitting there at the table, your date is telling you all about the many, meatballs and wheatgrass juice and all the different things that you're going to be trying to. And, this may or may not be something that you're familiar with. So imagine also that partway through the meal, you happen to reach for the dessert fork too soon. And your date very politely says to you, you know what, it's not time yet. Why don't you go ahead and wait on that? Because, they're kind of doing you the favor of teaching you the proper etiquette of how to be in this meal experience, just to save you any embarrassment. And then they've sort of already decided in their head how the flow of the evening should go, so they think, well, dinner's going to take us approximately 73 minutes, start to finish. So after that, conversation's going to be really good, but I think what we should do is just go back to my place. They've set up a whole queue of, Lifetime channel videos for you to watch, and everything has been planned to the last detail. It's probably at this point in the evening that you're going to start checking your watch and say, you know what, I think I might have an early meeting tomorrow. So the thing about this that's interesting is that I don't know that probably about 90% of us would want to be on this date, but there is a really good 10% of people who would be ecstatic about this because they already love vegan food and they already love the Lifetime Network. But the thing that's interesting is that 90% of the world is going to think, this person has done no work in figuring out what it is that I like. They're not really listening to me. They're just sort of doing whatever it is that they choose to do at this particular time. And that might be the most perfect evening for them, but it doesn't really lead much for me in terms of this. So bringing us back to the whole idea of programming based on music alone, it's interesting because we invite audiences to our space in the concert hall where they sit in our chairs for an amount of time that we decide. They listen to the music that we choose, and then we tell them that if they don't immediately like a piece, they should learn more about it, either because we're going to talk about it first or because we've got program notes for them. And if they do like it already, they should totally clap, but not quite yet, right? Because we're going to tell them when that's going to need to happen. So you can start to see how there's a little bit of room in this conversation for us to be listening to what our audience is going to want. And that makes for a much more interesting dialogue in terms of how you create the product that you are going to be presenting to them, and also how it is that you talk about it. So I wanted to bring up the churn study, which, if you're on polyphonic.org, there's a really good chance that you already know about this. There have been some really good articles about it recently in the last few months. And the whole idea of this was, why is it that audience members who come to the symphony orchestra for the first time as single ticket buyers, why is it that they're not converting into subscribers for life? A lot of the focus of symphony orchestra marketing has to do with getting people in the door for the first time. So why is it that they're doing a decent job in doing that, but they're not sticking? So I came across this as part of their slideshow that they put together to talk about the findings from the study. And it's interesting because they started, going through the whole experience. It was difficulty exchanging tickets. Parking was a nightmare. There wasn't a really good opportunity to have dinner before the show, so the flow of the evening was just a little bit weird. And then even though, the musicians played great, there was so much about the experience that left this person something to be desired, that it was just kind of a drag to keep hearing from the organization over and over requesting donations, because they hadn't really felt a connection yet with the organization. And again, if you've seen this churn study, you won't be surprised by this. But if you haven't, the thing that really got me was that when they were going through the list of things that didn't allow people to be converted into a subscriber, or the reasons why single ticket buyers didn't stick around, their main issue was parking. That was the #1 issue. And so while we might sweat over what it is that we present on the stage, it's not necessarily going to be the #1 thing that keeps your audience coming back. The other thing that I wanted to bring up here, and this has to do with my comment regarding 10% of people being totally in love with vegan cooking and the Lifetime Network, and the other 90% needing a little bit of hand-holding in terms of how to get there. This is the Knight Foundation's Classical Music Consumer Segmentation Study. And if you look on the right column in the top, you'll see the percent of US adults, which is 3.8%, that's an educated classical audience. So what that tells you is that our number isn't even 10%, it's 3.8% of people who are really already there with us and who don't need anything else in terms of coming to the art. And there's really nothing wrong with the traditional type of programming, particularly for people who are already in that 3.8%. And there's nothing wrong with that programming anyway, because a lot of those folks are going to be your most loyal subscribers already. But what we're here talking about is how do you reach out to the other 96 to 97% of people out there who might need a bit of a hand in terms of getting into the art form for the first time, and then getting to the point where they really become evangelists for classical music, and then also for your organization in particular. And for us to be able to expand the art, of course, that's going to be an important conversation to have. So that's how we get into experience design. And there are 2 places in this webinar where I ripped off from Wikipedia. This is time #1. But basically, the whole idea with experience design is crafting a whole experience that's all about the user. So this is something that you might get in business speak, and it's something we should definitely consider as we're setting up programs as classical musicians. Not only what it is that we're going to put on the stage, but what are all of the different parts of the experience that are going to come together to form a really unique thing for our audience to come together with us on. And the one thing that I want to make really clear is that we're not talking about dumbing things down. We're not talking about chamber music light or anything like that. What we're talking about is simply finding the middle of the Venn diagram, that place where your interests and their interests already intersect, and you can explore that on a really high artistic level in a way that's going to come together beautifully for your audience. So who is your audience? Because after all, you can't really think about crafting an experience for someone if you don't know who they are. We're going to come into the second time now where I used Wikipedia. So audience psychographics. A lot of times we've probably heard all about demographics as being an important thing in terms of figuring out who your audience is. So those variables might be age and gender and where they live and that kind of stuff. But psychographics goes much deeper than that. It's basically anything having to do with their personality, their values, their shopping habits, their interests, their lifestyle. I mean, there's so many different things that go into a psychographic profile of someone. But all of these things really help you to intimately know who it is that you're reaching. And a lot of times we hear this word come into play when we're thinking about marketing. But honestly, it goes so much past just how you speak about your program. It should really start to enter into how you design the program itself. So if you want to figure out who it is that you're reaching now, I've put in some sample survey questions for you. And these are things that came from a marketing study that we did a couple of years ago with Carol Fox and Associates, so I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. But some of these questions are things that allow you to get to know your audience a little bit better than what kind of music do you like, Beethoven or Carter. So, you know, the magazine and website question is great because if you look at a magazine, there's a particular look and feel within the pages that gives you a clear sense for what a particular person would like when they look at that. And you know, that can inform how you speak, your language choices. It could inform the colors on your website, what kind of fonts you choose. There's a lot that you can glean from that. There are also other ones here about clothing and the type of car you drive and how you check your email, if it's on your BlackBerry, on your iPhone, on your Android device, on your computer. All of those things tell you what kind of apps you want to be creating down the line, or how you want to be selling tickets, or whether your blog needs to have certain capabilities for people to get in touch with you. And then the last question is something that we got early on from one of our board members, which was, just tell me where you were before you got here, because that might let you know where you should be placing your messages. So once you get to know who it is that you already reach, you could consider who it is that you want to be reaching. Maybe you're already reaching who it is that you want to reach, and that's totally fine. But if you are thinking to yourself, I'd like to see a different crowd of people coming in through our doors, or I know that our audience tends to look this particular way, but I'd love to expand it to X, Y, and Z. This is the point where you really need to be thinking about creating a profile. So a lot of times you'd be thinking about creating a bullet-pointed list of some random audience member or a group of people, and it's really hard to get specific when you do that. So the advice that we've been given is to give your potential audience member an actual persona that includes a name, a gender, and an age. So you could consider a lot of different options here, like their occupation, their marital and family status, their religious beliefs. All of the buying habits that you saw on the previous slide could work here. And basically, what we're looking for here are any items they own or places that they shop or organizations that they relate to that result in identity refreshment for them. And what that means is that when they bought their Prius, they felt like more themselves than at any other moment in their life. Or they carry an iPhone because they know that they are an early adopter for Apple, and there's just a particular type of personality that's going to do both of those things. So what you could do to sort of get a look and feel around this person that you want to reach is to create a visual collage. And this is something that we do. It's something that we encourage folks who are taking courses with us to do. And it's a lot of fun, actually. You just go into a bunch of different magazines and cut out pictures of things that you think they would like. So here you see the Prius, here you see the iPhone. Maybe this person shops at high-end boutiques, and they spend a lot of time at the cheese case in Whole Foods. And speaking of classes, I have a class at DePaul where I challenge my students to do this very thing. So I wanted to share with you one of the responses that I got from one of my students, which I thought was particularly great. So in the time that he was considering who his audience was, here's what he had to say. Trevor Elliott is a 26-year-old young professional who works in finance at a large Chicago-based insurance company. He grew up in the Chicago suburbs in a very close nuclear family, mom, dad, and 2 sisters, one older and one younger. He went to school at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He moved to Chicago when he finished school, and his parents helped pay for his spacious one-bedroom River North loft. He currently lives there with an English bulldog named Pumbaa, after the warthog from his favorite Disney movie, The Lion King. He now makes enough money to live comfortably on his own in what some might consider a life of luxury. He enjoys shopping at designer stores and department stores, his favorite including Barney's and Marc by Marc Jacobs. He enjoys occasionally going out for nice meals and likes to think of himself as a bit of a foodie, but he doesn't go out all the time because he's constantly dieting. He goes to the gym at least a few times a week. He hates to drive, but he owns a Jeep Wrangler Unlimited for when he ventures into the suburbs to visit his family. He's currently dating someone exclusively, but would not classify it as serious. He's a little afraid that he's going to end up raising a family in the suburbs like so many of his friends from high school, and he really wants to stay in the city. He drinks Starbucks every day and doesn't go anywhere without his iPhone, which he now uses to pay for his Starbucks coffee. He likes to portray himself as classy and sophisticated, but also young and trendy, which for him means going gallery hopping as opposed to going to a museum, and also going to a contemporary music concert at the MCA stage as opposed to heading to Symphony Center. And even though he may go out to the galleries and to the MCA, he would honestly prefer to spend most of his evenings at home, cleaning, watching reality TV or a blockbuster film, and drinking a bottle of wine. So I hope you can hear how intensely detailed that was. And I honestly hit the floor when I heard it because most of the other students in that class were still giving me like really general bullet points, even though I was looking for an actual persona. So I definitely asked him to share that with me, and I was very proud. So what does this tell you, after all? It tells you the type of voice to use. I mean, if you know that the people that you are speaking to are in love with Real Simple magazine, there's a particular voice and a look and feel to that type of messaging that you could use. Same thing for if you were looking at people who read Rolling Stone. It also tells you where to put your messages, because if they already align with certain brands, that could be a place where you could be positioning some of the messaging that you put out, whether it's print materials or cross-collaborating on their website. And then obviously partnerships and sponsorships that you want to cultivate, whether that's working together on certain events, seeking sponsorship from certain companies because they're going to be aligned with your marketing efforts, all kinds of things like that. So one of the main ways that we got into this was through seeing a presentation by Chip Conley, and he wrote a book called Peak, and he also owns maybe one of the top 2 boutique hotel chains in the country. And the way that he got so successful with his hotels was using psychographic profiling as he was figuring out how these hotels were going to work. So he used Maslow's pyramid, which hopefully you've seen at some point in your life, basically taking the physiological needs that you have as being important before you could even consider safety, before you could consider belonging, love, and all of that, all the way up to self-actualization. And then he made a parallel to the idea of using that for the arts. So if you were to reverse the order of this and put entertain me on the bottom as being the largest slot, that's what he would have suggested. And then above that, move me, and above that, transform me. So basically what he's saying is that if you're an arts organization, you should create something that's entertaining, and that's going to mean people are going to get their value and feel good about it. If you move up the pyramid, it's something that actually moves them, something that makes them feel a certain way. And then the transformative aspect comes in giving them an experience that they never knew they were going to have that night, whether it's through discussions after the concert that allow them to meet people they would otherwise never have talked to, and staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning and staying in touch with these folks afterwards, exploring these different issues. There are all these different things that you can do. And basically what happens is that once you give somebody an experience like that, they become an evangelist for you. So that becomes your best source of advertising, because they're going to not be able to stop talking about the experience. They're going to share it on Facebook, talk to their friends, and all of that great stuff. So that's really the main goal of what we're looking for in terms of creating an experience.
Okay, so now we've done our psychographic profile. We've figured out who it is that we want to speak with. We've kind of got an idea of the music that we'd like to play. But now we need to make a series. Now we need to make a show. And how do we do that? So what I'd like to do is kind of explain the process that we have used in the past, and for one of our specific shows, a very successful show, Black Violet. How we do this, or how we start the process, is we just scour. We scour the news, we scour YouTube, we scour the internet. And we think to ourselves, what's popular now? What could be popular in the near future? What is up and coming? The idea for Black Violet actually stems back probably 12 years ago for me. I've always been a graphics novel nerd and have loved graphic novels for a long, long time. But about 10 or 12 years ago, I started noticing that these graphic novels came from the underground and were making it more into mainstream. And once they started peaking in mainstream, I noticed that they started making it to movie theaters. And this is what started piquing my interest. So if we go back and we figure who it is that we're trying to cultivate, who are we trying to bring into our audiences, we established that we want somebody between the ages of 26 and 35. They're interested in current events, art, and nature. They don't want to stop at the warehouse clubs, convenience stores to buy groceries online. They'd rather drink coffee, like a Starbucks, bottled water, during the day, and then wine and import microbrew during the night. And maybe they spend at least $75 per month on entertainment. They aspire to wear clothes from designer boutiques, believe the Toyota Prius best suits their lifestyle, and they often go to movies. Is excited about trying new cultural activities and is culturally curious. So with this in mind, this is what stemmed the idea for the series. Again, our audience is the kind that wants to go to movies, so my thought was to create a very cinematic experience for them, and also bringing in this very up-and-coming style of art in graphic novels. So how did we choose this? Again, picking from something that is already up and coming and using that, and then we start to find a collaborator to work with. In this case, we searched out and tried to find somebody that was local, and we also tried to find somebody that was obviously very talented and that would be willing to work with another collaborator to create this theatrical type experience. So the person that we ended up settling on was Ezra Clayton Daniels, a very, very talented artist. And when we approached him, the way that we did it, we had already picked out the music that we would like to have performed, or would like to perform, and handed that to him in one big bundle. And we asked him, we would like to design a story around this music, but feel free to use it at your will. We didn't use the traditional concert experience of playing a singular piece all the way through. We divided up movements. We would take the whole piece, but not at the same time. So what this does is it allows us to use a movement of a piece to create a character, another movement from a separate piece to create the setting. And what this allows is for ebbs and flows in the storyline to follow the ebbs and flows of the music. This is very, very important for creating that cinematic feel, because in any movie you're going to have a piece of music or a theme that is going to go along with the character or a scene. And that's exactly the feeling that we wanted to get when an audience stepped into our concert hall. Then from there, once he had finished with the main part of the story, when the audience comes in the room, what they're going to see is this story, each caption within the graphic novel projected onto the screen. And we had timed it such that we had an operator standing behind the computer watching the score as we were playing. And when we hit that point in the score where the storyline was moving from one place to another, the slide would change. Again, giving a very silent movie-esque type feel. And what we're introducing is a newer medium of graphic novels and presenting it kind of in an old-fashioned way. Something very new for our audiences, though. The next thing is to figure out where you're going to perform this. Obviously, this is a new, something new for our audiences, so let's put this in a new space. Let's put this in a new location for somebody that wouldn't be expecting this. We found some really fantastic locations when we were premiering the show, the first of which is Evanston Space. And the reason this worked out beautifully is because this also returns back to our psychographic profile of who we are trying to interest in our show. The Evanston Space was connected to Union Pizzeria, which is the exact type of person that we were looking to pull in. They were that 26 to 35-year-old. They like to go out and eat every now and then, enjoy a reasonably priced martini at the bar, and then go see a show immediately afterward. The absolutely wonderful thing is that Union Pizzeria was directly connected to Space, so they could have that drink, they could have their quick meal, and then immediately just hand their ticket to the guy and come and see a show. On top of Evanston Space, we like to present our shows to people that don't normally get to see these type of things, so we always like to do free shows whenever along with the paid tickets at Evanston Space. We would also perform at Chicago Cultural Center, again, giving the people downtown and people that wouldn't normally get to see this type of show the opportunity to do so. So again, we are all about creating a feel for our shows. The second you walk in the doors, it is an experience. Very similar to what Melissa was talking about with the hotels. We like to do that with each of our shows. From the second you walk in the door, you are a part of the story. It's not sit down and then there's that fourth invisible wall which you must sit behind, and you can't speak, you can't talk, you're not allowed to think or be creative. You have to watch, and that's it. We are completely the antithesis of that. We want you very much to be a part of the story and a part of the experience. So from the programs, we try and do new and unique programs for every show. They're very individual. No two programs are going to be alike. And we want them to mimic the show. So for instance, for Black Violet, it was written, it was done on linen paper. We wanted this feeling as though somebody had just printed it on one of those old school printing presses and had posted it on a wooden door, and you were just ripping it down and reading from it. When you showed up in Evanston Space, you were greeted at a nice little mini table with lit by candles with a nice set of flowers and wine glasses, and you had beer that was sitting there ready for you. So again, very much a part of the experience, and you got to enjoy the show. And then after the show, you can come and see all of the products that we have along with it. So you've got the programs. We create these flowers, which are actually an integral part within the story. We have T-shirts with all of the branding, and along with our collaborators merchandise, which in this case Ezra brought all of his prior graphic novels that he'd already been working on. All of these things, again, a part of the story, integral part of the story, and then you can take that home with you. You can take that experience from the show home with you.
So that leads us into sponsorships. And as we mentioned, there's a way in which knowing your audience well helps you to inform what types of sponsorships you want to create. And as we were thinking about this, we sort of saw that Goose Island Beer Company was coming out with these Belgian-style reserve ales that had, you know, this really beautiful matte paper label, and it just seemed really old world to us, and we thought, you know what, this would be perfect. I know that they're trying really hard to market these this year. Why don't we just get in touch and see what happens? And it turned out to be a really perfect fit, also because the folks who were coming to Space and to the Union Pizzeria were exactly the demographic that they wanted to hit in terms of people who had the means and the interest to buy a higher end reserve style beer instead of the 312, which is the most popular one. So this was definitely an audience that they wanted to reach, so they came to every one of our shows, and they were able to do tastings in advance in addition to being paired with Whole Foods Market. And so when you came and sat at your table, you had a reserved table there, glassware from Whole Foods with their branding on it, or from Goose Island, and then you have your cheese plate with selections that have been chosen just to pair perfectly with the ales that you'd be sampling. So it's a really fun thing. And then we had a slide on the front with a mouse eating some cheese, and then with a beer stein, which was kind of awesome as well.
So again, this is all about creating an audience experience. Again, from the second you walk in the door, you are a part of the story. As you can see just from these pictures, I mean, this is the audience that you want. You want somebody sitting at a table. You want somebody that's enjoying themselves, not scared to talk or scared to laugh or scared to clap. We encourage our audience members to clap whenever they feel like clapping, to laugh when they feel like laughing. Again, they are a part of the story. And when you have food and drink in front of you, it makes the experience all that much more enjoyable.
The other thing that's really cool about this is that there are a ton of times when the audience helps us to create the show itself. So in the case of Black Violet, we did a contest where people could submit photos of their pets, and we actually had Ezra draw them into the show, so you could see your poodle, your Shih Tzu on the dock with all the rest of the animals as they were escaping London. And then for this year's shows, we have something called a Hope Cadenza, because this show is all about social media. And basically we have people do this cadenza with us where they improvise on the spot, and they tweet or text their hopes for our characters in the show, and they show up on a screen. So they're actively a part of the experience, not just being passive.
So what? Basically, Melissa and Eric and I aren't all, marketing professionals. That's not what we thought we were going to be doing. We, like probably many of you, are musicians. We practice, we rehearse, and Melissa often says, and I think it's quite right, all of this stuff, all of this talk takes for granted that the music is there. It takes for granted the expertise, the artistry that we all work for in school, in our homes, in our studios, and in rehearsal together. I think the most interesting thing when we present this out to other schools and when we go and teach these workshops is the first thing people say is, shouldn't the music speak for itself? And before I say anything else, Melissa, are you hearing a really weird echo from me?
I am not.
Oh, great. Super. So, shouldn't I speak for myself? Yes. And shouldn't the music speak for itself? We all sort of have this notion, I think most of us do, that if we just practice and do the best we can and really be artists about it, that's all we need. And all I need to do is refer back to that night study from 2002, I believe. And that is absolutely true for 3.7% of the population. And if that's all we care about reaching, then we're doing great. But if you're like me, and you're like Fifth House, you think that this art, this music, has reached beyond people who know it. And we have to find ways to connect what we love and hold dear to people who may or may not know about it. So we can talk about how this gets started. Eric talked about the process of finding collaborators. While we're doing that, our ensemble sits down and talks about what music we want to play, completely independent of anything else. We always have a list going of pieces that we want to play. We call it the dream list. And everyone in our group, all 10 people, are invited to nominate pieces to that dream list. We all listen, we all vote on 2 criteria. First, how great of a piece we think it is, and second, how important it is that we program it in the next year. And those are 2 really important categories because we might have 12 piano quartets that are really incredible, but we don't want to have a season that is only piano quartets. Maybe we think that, for example, oboe was underfeatured this season, and we need to make sure that oboe gets a special piece next year. So those are all really important aspects of selecting the repertoire. But then once we start to dig into the pieces themselves and we listen to them over and over and over, certain things start to emerge. And for you, if you are figuring out how to program things, and there's a piece that you have dedicated months or years to learning, play it for someone who's never heard it before and see what they hear. I think that's a great start. In a second, I'm going to ask Melissa to play an audio sample of a piece we programmed last year in our series called The Weaver's Tales. And our cellist had nominated it for the Dream List many times. And let's just say it scored relatively low. We're going to hear just a couple seconds of it. Melissa, if you can give that a shot. Okay, that's probably enough.
Ah.
For those of you who don't know and love that piece already, that is Elliott Carter's Sonata for Flute, Oboe, Cello, and Harpsichord. I am a new music buff. I was not excited to play that piece. But in listening to it, in talking about it, we used terms like gruesome and violent. It was clearly very physical, and it made us react in a certain way, and we just weren't sure if we liked it. As it turns out, in our series that year, we wanted to have a few scenes that were more horror story than anything. We were telling the tale of Cinderella and the devil, and boy, did that sound like the devil and murder and mischief. And we played that piece, we programmed it, and now I love it, actually. But it was a huge journey and quite the triumph for our cellist. So sometimes you have to free yourself of what your preconceived notions of a particular composer or style are and think about how an audience would perceive it. When we presented that concert, that was paired with the Beethoven Septet. And when we did it at the Chicago Cultural Center, it was a very conservative audience, a more traditional classical audience of people of lots of life experience, shall we say. And in a talk back, the first thing that many octogenarians wanted to discuss with me was how much they liked the Carter. It was just bouncing off of their tongue. They couldn't wait to talk about it, and I was blown away. But they were listening to it based on that story element that you're now seeing in front of you, without that preconceived notion of what Elliott Carter or new music should be. So, narrative can inform your music choices. It can allow you to program things that you maybe couldn't have before, or to juxtapose pieces like Beethoven and Carter that might be strange otherwise, that doesn't fit into the mostly Mozart mode or model. So the question of how do you structure a program for narrative performances, I think is particularly interesting, because once you get over the main idea that you're not programming moment by moment, but you're programming 75 minutes or between 60 and 90 minutes at a time. You're creating an arch. You have one big story to tell. You end up being very free. So what we like to do is we like to, as Eric mentioned, interweave different movements over the course of a concert. So you heard the complete Beethoven Septet and the Elliott Carter Sonata over the course of that concert, but we had them set up at different parts of the stage, and it was almost like a dialogue back and forth between some of these movements. And in that juxtaposition, you can hear more of the qualities of the piece that after 20 or 30 minutes, sometimes you might start to tune it out. But when they're going back and forth, you hear a dialogue that I think is very unique and interesting. When you're picking music, it's great also to think about what pieces might be overlooked, might be underrepresented in the marketplace. And if you want to go with things that are very classical, which we do, we almost always program some heavily classical repertoire as well, try and find pieces that you feel that you have a particular voice through, something to share, other than, this is really famous and I know you'll like it. I think that's important when you're choosing music. But there are quite a few challenges of presenting music this way too. Psychologically, it can be a definite jump to do the first concert like this. I vividly remember backstage before our very first concert when we were doing this. And I honestly don't think I've ever been more scared for a performance. I will be honest and say that there were very few people there that day. But it wasn't about that. It was about the risk that we were taking. And I was terrified. I know other members of the ensemble were too. But as we practiced and really worked on this skill of switching between pieces, between different parts of the stage, we learned how to enjoy and appreciate that experience. Artistically, it can be very, very difficult to switch styles, and that does create problems. And what this drives home is the need to rehearse beyond learning the music itself, but then practicing the show as a whole and switching between styles. A program we did in December, we were going back and forth between the Mendelssohn D minor trio and two very, very new, very aggressive rock-inspired piano trios. And even though we had practiced all those pieces to a great length, when we actually started going back and forth between them, it felt like a first rehearsal all over again. And then there's always technical issues when you start dealing with multimedia. Projectors can go wrong. You might have lighting problems. So it's important to be proactive about thinking about those issues. And even in the case of the program we're doing this week, one of the pieces that we're playing requires scordatura on the cello. And since we're going back and forth, we actually are employing 2 different cellos over the course of this concert. Only one cellist, but 2 cellos. So really looking at those aspects, planning them out, it takes an excruciating amount of work. But if you're doing this with the audience in mind, it can bring a lot of benefit as well. So these things emerge that, frankly, I never expected. When you take that risk of exchanging movements and going back and forth between styles, it's almost like hearing composers talk to each other, hearing a dialogue between sort of the wonderful, revered composers like Brahms and Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert, all of those people who we grew up studying, and hearing them interface with voices of now, with young composers, with contemporary composers. I always like to play the game, you know, these 2 composers might be dead and long gone and they never overlapped, you know, by centuries. But here they are on the same program, on the same stage, talking back and forth to each other. And we all carry that history with us. So it's interesting to hear that go back and forth between the composers and the musicians on stage. Non-musical advantages are tremendous. This kind of program appeals to people who aren't used to a concert medium. I don't want to say it panders to people because I don't think it does, but it does address the attention span deficit that many people in our society have. And I'm going to go ahead and include myself. You know, I catch myself watching TV and looking on the computer at the same time with some frequency. And while I'm not proud of that, a lot of us do that. And we don't suddenly become new people when we enter a concert hall. We don't become necessarily better versions of ourselves. So finding ways to engage on multiple levels, to connect, to hold attention, and to keep people active in their listening is crucial. And I think that's been a huge benefit to this kind of performance. This active listening is really, really crucial. For anyone who works in an educational component, these are key words that we're always trying to teach kids, how to listen actively. And the fact of the matter is adults need that training as well. So I'm a huge fan of, you know, speaking at concerts and having thoughtful program notes and things like that. But if you compare 2 experiences, it's quite easy to see effectivity. So if we're playing a 30-minute work, say the Beethoven septet, and I say, well, okay, in the first movement, you're going to hear this kind of form. This theme is going to come back at about 7 minutes and 42 seconds, so set your clocks. And when you hear it, nod to yourself because you'll understand it and that'll make you appreciate the piece more. And the third movement, which you aren't going to hear for like 15 minutes, is going to feel really, really playful. So you can really enjoy that when we get there. That kind of talk versus an engaging experience so that while you're listening, you're hearing those kinds of pointers and tips and notes come to light. You're seeing them on the screen, in the staging, in the costuming, in the lighting. So everything that we're doing leads our audience to engage in the music versus to receive the music. I think that's important. And that last bullet invites dialogue. This is huge. It's not enough for people to appreciate our music and think that we play it well. I want them to think about the music more. I want them to go listen to other music groups. I want them to explore new types of music that maybe they haven't heard before. And in terms of inviting dialogue in our concert, we make a very strong point of as soon as we're done playing, we put the instruments down and we get out as quickly as possible to try and meet the people who were so kind to come to our show, to hear their responses, good and bad, to learn about them, what interests them, and how we can engage them even better next time. And like Melissa said, through the Hope Cadenza, we invite that through live tweeting as well, to see their thoughts, reactions, and allow them to be a part of our show. It makes every performance unique, memorable, special, and exciting. And it's great at this point, after a number of years of this type of practice and presentation, to be able to reflect on what we've done. So I'll turn it back to Melissa.
Hooray. So it's time now for some questions, and I have to say this has been the most bizarre type of speaking engagement because normally we get to see the eyeballs of all of you who have been listening to us. So we're looking forward to actually hearing you now.
Great. Well, thanks for that, guys. That was really, really interesting, and it's fascinating to see the kind of detail that you're looking into with regard to your audience, and that's really, really interesting. So we do have a few questions submitted, and I just want to quickly remind people how to ask questions. If you want to actually verbally ask your questions, there's a yellow hand button on your control panel. You can hit that, and then we can unmute your line. Or you can write a question into the question box on the control panel, and we will go ahead and read it for you. So let's just go ahead and get into what's been submitted so far. One question here that says, do all of your programs feature a visual component?
So good question. All of our series programs, so we do a signature series per year, which might have 3 or 4 concerts, will involve some type of multimedia, whether that's projected images or physical theater actors or dancers or some other type of collaboration, because that's really central to our creative process. But we do a lot of more traditional programs. For instance, when we play at the Dame Myra Hess Memorial Concerts or the Rush Hour Concerts at St. James, we're just doing a straight-up program, and people are enjoying the music for what it is. And as much as we have the ability to speak about the music or to present it in interesting ways, we do, but those are more straight-up concert experiences, so we really do both.
Okay, great. Another question just came in here. It says, do you have any suggestions for programming shows in public, casual spaces where silence lighting isn't an option?
Silence and lighting are not an option. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is that you have to think to yourself, what are people already there to do? And we've been in so many spaces where the audience is transient, and I might let Adam talk about this a little bit more, but you know, some of those spaces might be bars like Danny's Tavern or the Adler Planetarium or the Shed Aquarium, where we know that there are going to be activities going on. And basically, you have to consider, of course, what it is that you're going to play and what you expect your audience to be doing. So it could be that they're having conversation and having drinks, in which case, you know, what you program shouldn't be 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Like, it should be something that engages them to listen to you and to tap their foot and to enjoy what it is that you're doing. And then in the case of something like the Shed Aquarium, you know, you could program something where if you do have an audience who is there with you for a certain period of time, you know, in our case, we did a collaboration with the educational department so that parents could bring their kids, and there were activities that they could do with reflection and refraction in water, or how rain forms, or things like that while they're listening to the music. And then we've got other folks who are just milling around the particular gallery that we were in. So it really didn't matter. I mean, people were enjoying the music for as long as they were there, and you know, we had a good time doing it. Adam, did you have any other suggestions on that?
Sure. I think it's good to read the energy of a particular space. Some spaces just create a more natural, solemn, or active environment. For example, a bar versus a sort of offbeat art gallery. And when you read that energy, you can make a couple of different choices, and often you can go back and forth between them. You can support that energy by playing something that matches that tone, or you can try to bring something new into it. And I think a successful program will cover both of those types of experiences, such that if you're in a bar, maybe you want to start off by playing something that's more aggressive, that'll kind of be fun and rockin'. And oftentimes you can find great classical music that isn't out of place in a bar, whether it's Ligeti or Bartók or Mason Bates or David Little, or, you know, plenty of things. And then I think once you get people, you can take them on a bit of a journey. I think it's interesting in places like art galleries where people are used to talking or milling about. If you try something that's very quiet, you might be able to instill greater listening. People might get quiet with you. It's possible. I'd say that when you do program for those types of things, it's important to have a lot of different ideas on tap and to be flexible in what you do, so that you can kind of play with the audience as it goes along, and having that element of improvisation in terms of exactly what you're going to play or what order can be a fun challenge for you, and that translates well to the audience experience.
Yeah, and just because the question included lighting, be responsible for being able to see your own music because a lot of times if you're in a bar, the lighting is not going to be good for you to do that. So have good cordless stand lights or use your iPad to read your music.
Awesome. It looks like we have someone here who's raised their hand. Maura, I'm going to try to unmute you. Can we hear you?
Yes, I'm on. Can you guys hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Great. I have a question. You guys, Fifth House has really distinguished itself from other grassroots classical organizations in your ability to make what you do in unusual spaces viable as a business model. And I think a lot of community-based groups struggle between either charging too much money or not enough money. So can you talk a little bit about your business model and how you've found something that works for your audience and the community that you're serving?
Hey, Maura. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting. A lot of times when it comes to pricing, the time that we have the most control is in our own signature series. So we've tried a lot of different things, honestly. And it's a constantly evolving process because sometimes each year we might switch a venue or two. And so it always is going to be dependent upon the venue and the audience that we're trying to reach. So, you know, with Black Violet being an example of something that worked really well, we knew we were going to be at Space. We looked at what the average ticket price was for, you know, different types of shows at Space, whether they were classical, because they had a few sort of limited classical offerings there, or more local groups or nationally touring bands. And we kind of put ourselves on the middle to low end to make things really affordable for people and also to allow them to sort of take the risk on something new because Space was not known as a classical music venue. So it would very much be a risk for somebody who was there for pizza to say, hey, yeah, I'll totally check that out. So we wanted to make it easy for them to make that decision. And we were really surprised and kind of humbled by the fact that we would see our sign out front and people would just flood in the door and be like, oh, well, that sounds good. You see them shrug and then like walk in and then have a great time. At the same time, we also wanted to make sure that the shows are free and accessible to anybody who wanted to see them. It's a very large part of our mission. So we do a large amount of fundraising every year to make sure that we can do some of our performances for free. So every show that we did as part of that 3-concert series was also repeated at the Chicago Cultural Center completely free of charge, and that was sponsored by the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. So it was something that was very important for us to do. And you know, this last year, every single one of our concerts was free due to the fundraising that we did. So every year is just a little bit different. And you know, some of the venues that we work with have a set way that they need to deal with that because, you know, as we said, there's some spaces where the audience is transient, so you can't really charge them a particular ticket price to come into that room of the aquarium for those, you know, few minutes that they're going to be there. But, you know, we might take a percentage of, you know, donations or whatever for the day. You know, there's so many different ways that it can work. But I think that your question is an important one because at the same time that we're here to promote our art and to make it something that everybody can access, we also need to be here in order to allow it to occur. So it means that you have to have an incredibly diverse set of sources that your income can come from, whether it's contributed or earned, and that mix has to always be as wide as it can be in order to support what it is that you're trying to do.
And to add on to that, we like to give the presenters a lot of choices. But at this point, we've developed, you know, 3 complete series for them, plus some of the other shows that we've done in the past. And what this does is it gives them a different number of sized groups. For Black Violet, you're dealing with a 3-part series show with pretty much every member of the group in most every show. These would be for the larger budget. This year, our goal was to create 4 different shows with smaller groups that would be more portable and more easily tourable so that we can present them around the country. So giving them not only musical options as far as the pieces that you're playing, but also ensemble sizes, it just gives them the opportunity to make those choices and feel like they're a part of the decision.
one more question before we wrap it up tonight. So we have one more that's come in here that says, how did you get started? Did you always have multimedia, and how has your mission and approach evolved over time?
That's a great question. We've been around since 2005, and many of our members had gone through the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, and more specifically the Music Corps program through Civic. So one of the things that's great about that program is that in addition to the big concerts on the stage at Symphony Center with wonderful repertoire and conductors, they send you out into different community venues throughout the city to do chamber music concerts. And those of us who form this group, many of us have been through that program and have been so inspired by the opportunity to not only choose the repertoire that we were performing, but to be so close to a particular audience and to see how different these audiences can be in all of these different spaces throughout the city. So, you know, in terms of the mission, we had two decisions that we made the first time that we got together. The first decision was we are going to run this as a business from day one. We are not going to just put together a concert, cross our fingers, and pray. We're actually going to run this fiscally responsibly from the beginning and set up a business structure. And then the second decision we made is let's figure out our point of difference. So we always knew that we were going to be incorporating different art forms, and the way in which we do that evolves every year, but it has always involved collaboration between music and other arts, which is why the name Fifth House is there. The fifth house in astrology is the house of creativity and pleasure in the arts, and we knew we wanted to have something that would encompass that sort of synergy that can happen. So in terms of how the mission has changed, I mean, we've changed a few syntax things here and there, but honestly, I'm proud to say that our mission has stayed pretty constant since the very beginning in, you know, bringing music to where people are. And that's not just through bringing music to non-traditional spaces, but also bringing music to where people are intellectually and in terms of their interests and in terms of what kids are learning in schools today. So that's what we're doing, and it's been a really fun ride.